When the night grows quiet and the outside world begins to slow down, sometimes the most comforting thing we can do is listen to a story gentle enough to relax the mind, yet deep enough to awaken the imagination. Tonight we will travel back to the year 1492, to a remarkable moment in history when three small ships left the harbor of Palos and sailed into a vast, largely unknown ocean. On those ships were ordinary people carrying with them fear, hope, and curiosity about a world they had never seen. From the reflective perspective of Jung, journeys like these are not merely geographical explorations. They also reflect a deeper human longing, the desire to step beyond the familiar and search for what lies unknown. Welcome to Stories for Sleep, a place where stories of history, science, and the human journey are told in a slow and gentle rhythm, so you can listen as you drift towards sleep. If you enjoy quiet journeys through time like this, remember to subscribe so you won't miss the stories that follow. And now, take a slow breath. Let your mind relax. As we begin our journey back to the night before the great voyage of 1492, a moment on the edge of the unknown, there are moments in history when humanity stands before an invisible boundary. The boundary between the known world and something entirely unknown. The year 1492 was one of those moments. On a quiet morning at the small port of Palos in southern Spain, three modest ships prepared to leave the shore, heading toward an ocean so vast that many Europeans believed it might stretch endlessly. No one standing at the harbor that day could know that this journey would change the history of the world. Yet what history books often overlook is the inner experience of the people on board those ships. They were not mythical heroes. They were ordinary sailors, men carrying hopes, fears, and a quiet curiosity about what might be waiting beyond the horizon. If we listen to history, not only with logic but also with imagination, we may realize that the voyage of Christopher Columbus was not simply a geographical or political event. From Jung's perspective, journeys like this often reflect something deeper within the human psyche, the longing to enter the unknown. From ancient times until today, human beings have always been drawn toward unexplored lands, not only on maps, but also within the landscapes of their own inner lives. Tonight's story will not rush through historical events. Instead, imagine that you are one of the 90 sailors preparing to step aboard those small ships. Feel the wooden boards creaking softly beneath your feet. Smell the salt of the ocean in the air. Look up at the wide night sky stretching above as the voyage is about to begin. You will experience the long days at sea with them, the quiet worries when land disappears behind the horizon, and the moment when the distant line of the horizon finally reveals a new world. This is not only a story about exploration, it is a story about human beings standing before the unknown, an experience both frightening and full of hope. And as we slowly enter this story, you may begin to notice that history, like the waves of the ocean, always carries deeper stories about courage, curiosity, and the human search for meaning. The night before departure, Palos, the 2nd of August 1492. On the night of the 2nd of August 1492, at the small harbor of Palos in Andalusia, Spain, the air carried a very special kind of stillness. Wooden ships rested quietly on the dark water, their hulls gently rocking with the slow rhythm of the tide. Torchlight shimmered across the sea, reflecting like fallen stars scattered on the surface of the ocean. On the docks around, 90 men prepared for a voyage whose outcome none of them could fully imagine. Some silently tied the final coils of rope. Others checked barrels of water and food, and a few simply stood looking toward the dark horizon where the ocean stretched into what seemed like endless space. In that moment, Palos was no longer just a harbor. It became a boundary between the familiar world of Europe and the vast unknown beyond. The sailors gathered there that night were not legendary heroes. They were ordinary men, sons of fishermen, carpenters, shipbuilders, men who knew the sea but had never imagined traveling so far from land. Inside their minds lived a mixture of emotions, hope for reward, worry about the long journey, and a quiet fear of what might lie ahead. Some believed they would reach wealthy lands in the east. Others feared the ocean might stretch endlessly, filled with storms, and the sea monsters that still haunted the imagination of European sailors of that time. There were no accurate maps, no certainty about the distance, only the confidence of their commander and the courage or sometimes desperation of those willing to board the ships. Through the psychological lens of Jung, this night before departure becomes more than a historical event. It becomes a symbol. Jung believed that humans are often drawn toward unknown territories because those places reflect something hidden within the collective unconscious. The vast ocean with its endless horizon appears in myths and dreams as a symbol of the unexplored depths of the human mind. And so when the sailors prepared to leave Palos, they were not only beginning a geographical journey. In a symbolic sense, they were stepping into an ancient human story, the journey into the unknown. Around them, the sounds of the harbor blended into a quiet nighttime symphony. Footsteps on wood ropes, tightening waves brushing softly against the hulls. Some sailors may have been thinking about the families they had just left behind. Others may have tried not to think too deeply, because sometimes the only way to step into the unknown is not to look too closely at one's fears. In the dim torchlight, wooden barrels of supplies were carried aboard. Sails were tied securely. Navigators inspected the simple instruments they would rely upon. There were no modern compasses, no detailed charts, only rough tools, and the experience of men who had spent their lives at sea. Perhaps the most striking thing about that night was the silence among the sailors. Not a complete silence, but a quiet stillness inside each person. In Jungian psychology, such moments are often described as thresholds of transformation. Before entering a new phase of life, people often pause at a fragile moment, where past and future seem to exist together. The night at Palos was exactly such a moment. Within a few hours, the ships would leave, and everything familiar would slowly fade behind them. If you imagine standing there on the harbor that night in the summer of 1492, you might feel that strange atmosphere. No one knew what would happen. Perhaps they would discover new lands. Perhaps they would never return. But it was precisely that uncertainty that gave the moment its power. Because throughout human history, many great turning points begin with a simple decision to step into the unknown, even when the heart is still full of hesitation. 3 small ships and an enormous journey. As the sun rose, on the morning of the 3rd of August 1492, the 3 ships slowly drifted away from the coast of Spain. In the poor early light, they looked remarkably small, almost fragile against the immense Atlantic Ocean. These were not giant warships like those seen in modern films. They were simple wooden vessels. Yet those modest ships carried a journey that would transform world history. The 3 ships, Santa Maria, Niña, and Pinta, each seemed almost like characters in a story. The Santa Maria was the largest, about 19 meters long, and served as the flagship. By modern standards, it would resemble little more than a fishing boat. The Niña and the Pinta were faster caravels, lighter and more agile, designed to harness the winds of the Atlantic. Looking at their true size helps us understand the boldness of the voyage. The Atlantic stretches thousands of kilometers. Storms can appear suddenly. Waves can rise higher than the ship itself. Yet these vessels were barely 20 meters long. They had no engines, no navigation systems, no rescue ships waiting nearby. If a storm tore the sails or cracked the hull, there would be little chance of survival. Inside the ships, life was cramped and uncomfortable. The lower decks were dark and low. Food barrels and ropes filled most of the space. Many sailors slept on the open deck, wrapped in cloaks beside coils of rope. When rain came, their clothes stayed wet for days. When the sea grew rough, the deck became slippery and dangerous. There were no private cabins, no quiet moments. The ocean was always moving, and so was the ship. Through Jung's symbolic perspective, the ship itself can represent something profound. In ancient myths across cultures, the ship represents the human vessel traveling across the unknown. The ocean symbolizes the vast unconscious. The ship is the fragile structure of awareness that carries us through it. When the sailors stepped onto those vessels, they were stepping into more than wooden boats. They were entering a timeless human pattern, leaving safety behind to face the unknown. As the ships sailed farther from Spain, the coastline slowly disappeared. Ahead lay only the endless horizon. In such moments, the vastness of the world becomes unmistakably clear. And yet, it is precisely that fragility, the smallness of the ship against the immense ocean, that makes the story unforgettable. The ships carried not only sailors and supplies, they carried curiosity, imagination, and courage. The vast ocean ahead. As the sun set over the Atlantic, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and red, the three ships continued westward on the steady trade winds. Soon the coastline of Europe vanished completely. For the sailors, the ships themselves became their entire world. They worked, slept, hoped, and worried within the narrow wooden decks. The sounds of the ship became familiar, the creak of wood, the pull of ropes, the rhythm of waves against the hull. Each sound carried meaning. For sailors, this was the language of the sea. And in such an environment, surrounded by endless water, the mind often begins to wander deeper into itself. Jung suggested that environments like the open ocean can awaken deeper layers of the human psyche. The vast sea becomes like a mirror, reflecting hopes, fears, and hidden thoughts. For the sailors aboard those ships, the voyage was not only across the Atlantic, it was also a quiet inner journey through the landscape of their own minds. Night fell across the ocean. Stars appeared above, brilliant and countless. Guided by those ancient constellations, the three small ships continued westward, tiny wooden vessels drifting through a vast sea, carrying ordinary men, and a journey that had only just begun. The people on the ships. As the three ships, Santa Maria, Nina, and Pinta, gradually sailed away from the coast of Spain, carrying with them the gentle sound of waves brushing against wooden hulls and sails filled with wind. The decks held more than ropes, wooden barrels, and supplies. What truly formed the spirit of that voyage were the people aboard. Around 90 men stepped onto those three small ships, each carrying a different story, a different past, and a different reason for leaving the familiar land behind, to sail into an ocean that was still largely unknown. Most of them were sailors from the coastal towns of Andalusia. They had grown up beside the sea, familiar with the scent of salt in the air and the sound of wind moving through sails. Many had already taken long fishing trips or commercial journeys along the coasts of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. They understood the sea. They knew how to read the wind. They knew how to guide a sail. But this voyage was different from anything they had experienced before. There would be no coastline to follow, no familiar harbors to stop at. For the first time in their lives, they would sail into waters that the maps of that time still left mostly blank. Alongside the experienced sailors were other men whose skills were essential for a long journey. There were carpenters responsible for repairing the hull if the wood cracked during storms. There were caulkers who used tar and hemp fibers to seal the gaps between planks and prevent seawater from entering the ship. There were navigators who understood how to observe the stars and use the compass to maintain direction. And there was also Luis de Torres, the expedition's interpreter, a man believed to know several languages, including Hebrew and Arabic. Columbus believed the voyage might reach Asia, where such languages might prove useful. Among the men aboard were also a few who had not joined entirely by choice. Some prisoners had been given the opportunity by the Spanish crown to redeem themselves by joining the expedition. For them, the voyage was not simply an adventure. It was a second chance in life, even though that chance led them into a journey filled with risk. Yet, among all these people, a few figures played especially important roles. Among them were the Pinzon brothers, highly respected and experienced sailors in the maritime community of Palos. They were the ones who helped persuade many sailors to join the voyage when very few people initially trusted Columbus's plan. The reputation of the Pinzon family served almost like a guarantee that the journey, though dangerous, was still worth attempting. And of course, at the center of everything stood the leader of the expedition, Christopher Columbus. For many sailors, Columbus was both admirable and difficult to understand. He was not born in Spain, but came from Genoa, a port city in Italy. Yet he carried an unshakable belief that by sailing west across the Atlantic Ocean, it would be possible to reach Asia faster than by traveling around Africa. His belief was so strong that it sometimes made others feel he was chasing a dream that seemed almost impossible. From the psychological perspective of Jung, figures like Columbus often represent what he called the traveler archetype. This is the symbolic image of a person willing to leave safety behind in order to step into the unknown. In many ancient stories of humanity, this traveler always appears the one who crosses oceans, deserts, or deep forests in search of something beyond the familiar world. Perhaps that is why the story of the 1492 voyage continues to captivate people even today. Yet if we look more closely at the men standing on the decks, we realize that not all of them were dreamers seeking discovery. Each man had his own reason for boarding the ships. Some hoped to find gold or rewards from the royal court. Some sought fame or a chance to change their lives. Others simply needed money to support their families. And some may have joined because life on land offered them few other choices. This diversity made the crew resemble a small portrait of European society at that time. People with different pasts, hopes, and fears stood together on the same small ships, all heading toward the same horizon. And as the ships moved farther from the coast, those differences slowly blended into a shared experience life upon the open sea. In the days and nights ahead, they would face strong winds, rough waters, exhaustion, and the growing distance from land. They would share food, labor, and stories during the brief hours of rest. Gradually, the ship itself would become a small world where everyone's fate was closely tied to the others. So when we look back at the voyage of 1492, we do not see only 3 small ships on a historical map. We see a group of very different people stepping together into a journey whose outcome none of them could possibly know. And it was those people with their courage, fears, and hopes who turned the voyage into one of the most memorable stories in human history. Ordinary lives on the ocean. If we look even more closely at the people aboard those ships, we begin to realize that the voyage of 1492 was not only the story of famous figures in history books, it was also the story of ordinary individuals whose names have mostly faded with time. Yet they were the ones who woke up every morning on the decks, pulled the sails in strong winds, pumped water from the hull when waves spilled inside, and kept the ships moving in the right direction during long nights at sea. Without them, the voyage could never have taken place. Imagine an early morning on the deck of the Nina or the Pinta. The sun is just rising above the horizon, casting pale golden light across the wide water. The sailors begin their work very early. One checks the sail ropes. Another dries the deck still wet from the night. The navigator stands near the helm, observing the wind. In such ordinary moments, life on board slowly forms its own rhythm, the rhythm of the sea, of labor, and of waiting. Inside that narrow space, human relationships also become clearer. Some sailors quickly become close friends, sharing stories about their families and hometowns during rare moments of rest. Others keep to themselves, lost in thought, as they gaze across the endless ocean. Yet despite their differences, they all understand one simple truth. The fate of each person on the ship is tied to the fate of everyone else. If a storm appears, if the sail tears, if the hull is damaged, all of them must face it together. According to Jung's perspective, situations like this reveal something profound about human psychology. When people leave the familiar structures of society and enter harsh environments such as the open ocean, they begin to confront deeper layers of themselves. In the vastness of the sea, where the routines of land no longer exist, people often see their fears, courage, and desires more clearly. For many sailors on Columbus's ships, this voyage may have been the first time they truly felt the fragility of life. The ocean might be calm in the morning, yet only hours later, strong winds and towering waves could transform it into a completely different world. In those moments, people must rely on each other, on experience, and sometimes on faith that their journey holds a meaning beyond the fear in front of them. And through these everyday experiences, the crew gradually becomes a small community drifting across the ocean. They share the same ship, the same sky filled with stars every night, and the same hope that land lies somewhere ahead. Their differences in background begin to matter less. What remains is the feeling that they are participating in something larger than themselves. Looking back across centuries, what makes the story remarkable is not simply that the ships crossed the ocean. It is that these people stepped aboard, knowing they were heading into the unknown. Each carried personal hopes, personal worries, and personal dreams. And as the ship sailed farther west, leaving the familiar waters of Europe behind, the crew entered the next stage of their journey. Ahead lay not only the vast ocean, but also long days at sea, where life would become a repeating cycle of work, wind, waves, and waiting. It was during those days that the true experience of living aboard a ship in the Atlantic would begin to unfold. Departure and the last stop at the Canary Islands. On the Incend, the morning of the 3rd of August 1492, as the first light of dawn spread softly across the waters of Palos Harbor, the three small ships, Santa Maria, Nina, and Pinta, slowly left the port. The anchor ropes were released. The sails were raised. The sea wind filled the white sails like wings opening for a long journey. From the coast of Andalusia, a few townspeople stood watching as the ships drifted farther away. At that moment, no one could know they were witnessing the beginning of a voyage that would alter the course of history. But for the sailors on board, the feeling was different. It was quiet, anticipatory, like a slow step into waters they had never known. During the first days, the ships did not immediately face the endless Atlantic. Instead, they sailed along the coast of Spain, heading south toward the Canary Islands, a volcanic archipelago off the coast of Africa. At that time, the Canary Islands were a familiar stop for European sailors preparing to cross the Atlantic. There was fresh water, wood for ship repairs, and time to make final preparations before entering waters few Europeans had crossed. When the ships reached the Canary Islands, the sailors began their careful inspections. The sea may forgive small mistakes near land, but in the middle of the ocean, even a tiny oversight could become disastrous. And during these inspections, they discovered a serious problem. The Pinta's rudder was damaged. It had become loose and unstable, making it difficult for the ship to maintain direction in strong winds. So the crew spent several days repairing it. Carpenters used hammers and chisels to adjust the wooden joints, while sailors held the ship steady in the shallow waters near shore. Meanwhile, another important change took place on the Nina. Originally, the ship carried triangular Mediterranean sails. But before entering the Atlantic, Columbus and the navigators decided to replace them with square sails, which were better suited to the steady trade winds blowing from east to west. This was not merely a technical adjustment. It was like preparing the right wings for a long flight. During those days at the Canary Islands, the expedition existed between two worlds. Behind them lay the familiar lands of Europe. Ahead stretched the open ocean. Volcanic mountains stood silently beneath the blue sky, while sailors carried out their final tasks, repairing sails, checking ropes, and replenishing water and food. For many of them, it would be the last time they set foot on land for weeks, perhaps months. Jung believed that such pauses often represent important psychological thresholds, moments between the old and the new. The Canary Islands became such a threshold for Columbus's expedition. From the deck of a ship on a quiet evening there, one could look westward across the ocean and see the horizon stretching endlessly. No islands ahead, no guiding coastline, only sea and sky, a silent invitation. or perhaps a challenge to those willing to enter the unknown. When all preparations were finally complete, the ship set sail again. The Niña's new sails caught the wind, the Pinta's rudder was repaired, and the Santa Maria led the way. As the fleet left the Canary Islands and turned westward, they no longer followed any coastline. For the first time, they truly entered the open Atlantic Ocean. From that moment onward, the familiar world slowly disappeared behind them. Ahead lay only a vast ocean, where each passing day would carry them farther from Europe and deeper into a journey no one had ever experienced before. Crossing the Atlantic, endless days at sea. Once the ships left the Canary Islands and moved into the open Atlantic, a completely new phase of the voyage began. There were no more coastlines, no mountains or islands to guide them, only the ocean stretching to the horizon where sea and sky seemed to merge into an endless space. At first, many sailors still carried curiosity and hope, but as the days passed, they began to realize that life at sea was unlike anything they had known before. Time was not measured by calendars or church bells. Instead, it was marked by sand glasses. Every 4 hours, the sand finished falling, signaling the end of one watch and the beginning of another. And so day and night became a repeating cycle. Some sailors adjusted sails, others inspected masts and ropes, some pumped water from the hull. Life slowly became a rhythm of repetition. Morning light reflecting across dark blue water, night skies filled with stars used for navigation. Between those moments, time passed through simple repeating tasks. And it was precisely this monotony that made time feel longer. Living conditions were harsh. Most sailors had no beds. They slept on the deck, wrapped in cloaks or among coils of rope. When rain fell or waves splashed over the deck, their clothes became soaked with salt water. After a few days, the scent of the sea clung to everything: clothing, hair, skin. Space was extremely limited. The 3 ships were no larger than small houses, yet carried nearly 100 men along with food and supplies. Every corner was used. Barrels of biscuits and salted meat were tied beneath decks. Ropes coiled along railings. Spare sails stacked together. The sailors almost never had a moment alone. They worked, ate, and rested within the same confined space day after day. Jung suggested that environments like this create a special psychological state. When life becomes repetitive and disconnected from the familiar rhythms of society, the human mind tends to turn inward. In such monotony, people often begin thinking more deeply about their fears, hopes, and purpose. For the sailors of 1492, the vast ocean became almost like a mirror of the human mind. During the day, they saw water stretching endlessly. At night, they looked up at the stars and felt the smallness of humanity within the universe. In quiet moments, some thought about families back home. Others imagined the lands they hoped to find. Yet the rhythm of ship life continued. The sandglass turned. The sails caught the wind. The ship rolled gently across the long Atlantic waves. Day followed day. The horizon remained empty, and slowly the sailors began to understand that this voyage was not only a journey of discovery, it was also a test of patience, courage, and belief that somewhere beyond the endless ocean land truly existed. Food and conditions for survival. As the days on the Atlantic Ocean stretched longer than expected, and the horizon remained only an endless circle of water and sky, a very practical aspect of life on board gradually became more apparent: food, and the conditions for survival. On small ships such as the Santa Maria, Niña, and Pinta, there were no spacious kitchens or abundant food stores like those on land. Everything had to be prepared before departure and carefully stored in cramped wooden barrels beneath the deck. And when a journey lasted for weeks, even months, every piece of food began to carry its own quiet story of time and the sea. The sailors' diet was simple, even harsh by modern standards. The most common food was hard biscuit, often called hardtack. This bread was made from flour and water and baked repeatedly until it became extremely dry and hard, allowing it to last for long periods on a ship. When freshly prepared, it could still be eaten fairly easily. But after many weeks at sea, the biscuits often became so dry that sailors had to soak them in water or wine before chewing them. Many sailors grew accustomed to tapping the biscuit against the deck to shake out the small insects living inside before eating. Alongside the biscuits were salted meat and dried fish, the primary sources of protein for the crew. The meat was heavily salted to prevent spoilage during long voyages. Yet even so, after many weeks sealed in wooden barrels, the taste gradually changed. The salt kept the meat from completely decaying, but it could not stop it from becoming tough and sometimes unpleasant in smell. Dried fish faced similar problems. At first, it served as a reliable food source, but over time, the moisture of the sea, air, and changes in temperature made preservation increasingly difficult. Other supplies included beans, cheese, and wine foods that could last somewhat longer. Beans were occasionally cooked into simple meals when conditions allowed, while cheese was divided into small portions for the sailors. Wine served not only as a drink, but as an essential part of the daily ration, because drinking water on ships rarely stayed fresh for long. After several weeks, the water stored in wooden barrels often developed unpleasant smells and tastes. Wine, therefore, became the safer option for drinking. However, as the voyage continued, even these foods began to change. The water grew cloudy and sour, the biscuits contained more insects, and the salted meat sometimes showed signs of decay. Within the cramped and damp holds of the ship, preserving food became a quiet struggle between human preparation and the passing of time. The sailors understood that each meal was not meant to be an enjoyable culinary experience, but simply a way to maintain strength for the next day's work. From Jung's reflective perspective, such harsh experiences often reveal something essential about human nature. When familiar comforts disappear and life narrows to its basic needs, eating, sleeping, and working, people begin to see the world in simpler ways. On those ships, even a very modest meal could become a precious moment of rest between long hours of labor and the endless movement of the sea. Perhaps on quiet afternoons, when the wind filled the sails gently and the ship drifted slowly across calm water, a group of sailors might sit together on the deck, sharing their portions of biscuit and cheese. They might talk about their homes, about familiar European ports, or about the lands they hoped to find in the West. In such small moments, food was not merely nourishment. It became part of the bond between people sharing a long and uncertain journey. Yet as the days passed, the supplies gradually diminished. The sailors understood that everything had to be used carefully. Every barrel of water, every sack of biscuit, every piece of salted meat became more valuable. Life on board left no room for waste. Everything had to be measured carefully to last through the long voyage ahead. And within those simple, sometimes harsh conditions, the crew continued sailing westward. The ocean still stretched endlessly. The wind still filled the sails, and the ships continued rocking upon the long waves of the Atlantic. Inside the small world of the ship, these modest meals slowly became part of the daily rhythm of life. Yet alongside the monotony of food and the fatigue of the journey, the sailors also began to feel more deeply the unique sensory world of life at sea, a world of sound, scent, and constant motion. The psychological meaning of food. Looking more deeply into those long days at sea, we realized that food was not only a matter of physical survival, it also became a psychological experience for the sailors. When the same food was eaten day after day, when the smell of salt mixed with damp wood and salted meat within the ship's hold, the sailors began to feel more clearly the distance between life at sea and life on land. Meals no longer carried the warmth of family gatherings as they did in European homes. Instead, they became simple rituals, repeated almost mechanically, allowing the journey to continue. Yet within that simplicity, the human mind sometimes became more sensitive. A small piece of cheese, a sip of wine, or even a biscuit with fewer insects than usual. Such small things could bring unexpected comfort. What had once seemed insignificant on land suddenly became meaningful in the middle of the ocean. Some sailors may have leaned against wooden barrels on deck, slowly chewing hard bread, while staring across the distant sea. Memories of warm meals at home briefly passing through their thoughts. Jung believed that when humans are placed in unfamiliar and harsh environments, the mind often returns to its deepest memories. Familiar images, the smell of fresh bread, voices in a kitchen, the warmth of a fireplace become symbols of safety and stability. On the vast Atlantic in 1492, where everything felt uncertain, such memories may have quietly strengthened many sailors, helping them endure the long weeks at sea. Sharing food also played an important social role aboard the ships. When people must live together in cramped spaces for weeks, small gestures, sharing cheese, helping someone draw water from a barrel, can create powerful bonds. The ship gradually became a small community where everyone depended on one another for daily survival. In such circumstances, food was not only physical nourishment, it was also part of trust and cooperation among the sailors. Yet, despite these peaceful moments, reality remained present. Supplies slowly diminished. Water became unpleasant, and each passing day reminded the crew how far they were from home. The Atlantic Ocean, in the late 15th century, was not a familiar pathway like it is today. It was still a vast, unknown space, where small ships relied entirely on wind navigational experience and the belief that land truly existed somewhere ahead. And so those simple meals were more than just food. They were part of a deeper human experience, the experience of confronting uncertainty. Every piece of biscuit, every sip of wine, every carefully shared barrel of water reminded the sailors that this voyage was not only geographical, it was also a test of will and belief. A world of sound, smell, and motion. As the ships of Christopher Columbus sailed deeper into the Atlantic in 1492, the sailors' lives gradually narrowed into a very small space. The deck, the tall masts, a few cramped wooden cabins, and the ocean surrounding them on every side. Over time, they began to realize that the ship was more than a vehicle for travel. It had become a small living world of its own, a place where every human sense was surrounded by the constant sounds, smells, and movements of the sea. Days were no longer marked by roads or fields as in Europe. Instead, they were marked by sensations of the body in the middle of the ocean. The first thing any sailor noticed was sound. At first, the noises of the ship could make newcomers uneasy. The wind whistling through the rigging, the sails snapping when strong gusts arrived, the creaking wood of the hull under the pressure of waves. But after many days, those sounds gradually became familiar rhythms. At night, when most sailors slept, the watchman on deck could hear the sea gently striking the hull like the slow breathing of the ocean, the soft vibration of ropes in the wind, footsteps on wooden planks, occasionally the cry of a seabird overhead. Together, these sounds formed a quiet music of life at sea. The smells aboard the ship created their own world as well. 15th century wooden ships were coated with tar to keep water out, so the scent of tar often filled the air, especially on hot days when the sun warmed the hull. The smells of damp wood, old rope, and sea salt blended together. Below deck, where water and food were stored, the air was heavier. The smell of stagnant water, preserved food, and the sweat of many people living in a confined space created the ship almost never stood still. Even on calm days, long ocean swells gently rocked the vessel. At first, many new sailors suffered from seasickness, but gradually their bodies adapted. They learned to walk across a tilting deck to keep balance while pulling sails, and even to sleep while the ship continued moving. These sensory experiences created a special psychological environment. Jung believed that when people live within a confined space filled with repeated sensory stimuli, the mind slowly adapts by making that environment feel like part of itself. For the sailors of 1492, the ship became a miniature world. In quiet evenings, when the wind softened and the ocean grew calm, some sailors might sit against the mast and listen to the familiar sounds around them. The ship rocked gently like a living creature drifting across the sea. Above them, the stars stretched from one horizon to the other, brighter than any sky they had seen on land. In those moments, they may have felt as though they were living in a completely different world, a world separated from Europe, separated from cities and roads, separated from the life they once knew. Yet that small world also gave space for deeper thought. Without the usual distractions of life on land, the mind had room to wander. Some sailors thought of their families. Others wondered about the land they were seeking. And some simply gazed into the vast ocean, feeling the smallness of human life before the power of nature. The ship continued drifting like a small wooden island in the sea. Every sound, smell, and movement became part of daily life. Yet beneath that familiarity remained a fragile truth. One great storm, one mistake with the sails, or one sudden change in wind could sweep away this tiny world. Faith, fear, and superstition. As the ship sailed farther, from Europe, the sailors faced not only storms, waves, and material hardship. Another challenge began to appear within their minds: the fear of the unknown. The Atlantic Ocean in the late 15th century remained largely unexplored by Europeans. Maps showed only a small part of the world. Beyond those familiar areas lay enormous blank spaces, and within those empty spaces, human imagination filled the unknown with stories and fears. Religion played an important role for the sailors. Most had grown up in a world where Catholic faith shaped everyday life. They prayed before meals, before work, before sleep. In the middle of the ocean, where there were no churches and no land in sight, these prayers became even more important. Some sailors quietly crossed themselves each morning. At sunset, others recited familiar prayers together. These rituals brought comfort amid the vast sea. Yet alongside official religion existed many superstitions. For centuries, sailors had told stories about strange creatures beneath the sea: giant sea serpents, enormous whales capable of overturning ships, mysterious waters where vessels vanished. These stories may have begun from real experiences, exaggerated through time, or they may simply have been ways to explain things people did not understand. On long nights at sea, imagination could grow powerful. A strange noise beneath the hull, a dark shape moving through water, a sudden shift in wind. Any of these could spark whispered conversations among the sailors. To them, the Atlantic was not just a body of water. It was a mysterious realm. Jung believed that when humans confront vast and incomprehensible environments, the mind often responds by creating symbols and stories. These help people feel that the world still contains meaning and order. For the sailors of the 15th century, religion and sea legends served similar psychological purposes. They helped humans face the fear of infinity and uncertainty. Weeks passed, the endless ocean remained, and gradually another emotion spread among the crew: doubt. Some sailors began wondering whether they were truly sailing in the right direction. And a question slowly grew in many minds: would they ever see land again, or would this ocean continue forever? Signs of land. After weeks upon the Atlantic, when the crew had experienced hope, anxiety, and near despair, nature finally began offering small but meaningful signs. For sailors, these signs were more than natural phenomena. They were quiet messages suggesting that the endless ocean might soon end. One of the first signs was the appearance of birds. Earlier in the voyage, the sky above the ships had often been empty. But one morning, a sailor might look up and see a small flock of birds passing above the sails. For sailors, birds carried special meaning. Most birds rarely fly far from land. Their appearance suggested that land might not be far away. Soon, other signs appeared: branches drifting across the water, pieces of wood that seemed freshly broken. These objects could not exist in the middle of the deep ocean without coming from somewhere nearby. Sailors began watching the water more carefully. Every floating leaf, every piece of seaweed became a clue. Some noticed subtle changes in the color of the sea. Deep ocean water appears dark blue, but shallower coastal water often looks greener or lighter. Experienced sailors recognized this difference. From Jung's perspective, after long periods of uncertainty, the human mind becomes extremely sensitive to symbols of hope. A bird flying overhead becomes more than a bird. It becomes a promise that the journey may soon reach its end. The atmosphere on the ships began to change. Conversations grew livelier. Sailors stood longer at the bow watching the horizon. And then one night, during the quiet darkness of the sea, a watchman would look out toward the horizon and notice something unusual. A dark shape in the distance, the faint outline of land. And finally, after weeks upon the endless ocean, a voice would cry out the words every sailor longed to hear: land. The discovery of land, the 12th of October, 1492. After many weeks drifting across the vast ocean, where sky and water seemed to merge into a single endless horizon, the moment the sailors had been waiting for finally arrived. It was the night of the 12th of October, 1492, a quiet night upon the Atlantic Ocean. The ship continued gliding over the long rolling waves beneath the moonlight, and a sky filled with stars. On the deck of the expedition led by Christopher Columbus, a few sailors remained on watch, their eyes fixed forward into the darkness of the sea. And then one of them saw what everyone had been hoping for. The man was Rodrigo de Triana, a sailor aboard the ship Pinta. In the faint darkness of the night, he noticed something unusual along the horizon. It was not a wave. It was not a cloud. It was a dark shape, low and long, the unmistakable outline of land. The moment itself may have lasted only a few seconds, yet its meaning was far greater than anyone on board could have imagined at that time. The cry announcing land broke the silence of the night. Other sailors rushed forward, trying to see what Rodrigo de Triana had seen. In the dim light of moon and stars, they too began to recognize the shape of an island, slowly emerging from the darkness. After many weeks of seeing nothing but water and sky, the sight felt almost like a dream. As the sun rose the following morning, the view before the crew became clearer. Before them stood a green island where white sand stretched along the shoreline and tropical trees swayed gently in the wind. The deep blue of the ocean they had stared at for weeks now contrasted with the vibrant green of the land. Even the air seemed different, carrying the scent of soil, plants, and a world entirely new. Columbus stepped onto the island and named it San Salvador, although the people who lived there called it Guanahani. For the sailors, this was the moment when the tension, doubt, and exhaustion of the voyage seemed to dissolve. They had found land. They had crossed an ocean that many in Europe believed might be endless. Yet what made the moment even more remarkable was the presence of people already living on the island. The Taíno, the indigenous inhabitants of the Caribbean, observed the ships from a distance with curiosity equal to that of the sailors. When the two groups first saw each other, it was not merely a meeting between individuals. It was a meeting between two worlds that had developed separately for thousands of years. A meeting of worlds. The Taíno lived in an environment very different from the one the European sailors had come from. They were accustomed to tropical forests, the warm waters of the Caribbean, and small communities closely connected with nature. For them, the sight of large ships with towering white sails must have appeared extraordinary. And for the European sailors, the sight of unfamiliar villages, different clothing, and unfamiliar customs also inspired wonder and curiosity. From the psychological perspective of Jung, moments like this carry powerful symbolic meaning. In human journeys, discovering a new land is not merely a geographical event. It also reflects a deeper movement within the mind. A journey from the known into the unknown. In many symbolic traditions, the ocean represents the vast unconscious, both of the world and of the human psyche. Setting foot upon new land can therefore symbolize the discovery of a new layer of reality. For the sailors, seeing land after weeks upon the ocean must have been deeply emotional. In the days before, many had feared they might never find land at all. But now the white sand and green trees before them proved that their journey had meaning. Yet from the perspective of history, this moment also carried consequences far beyond what anyone aboard the ships could have understood at the time. The meeting between European sailors and the Taíno marked the beginning of a long and complex process, one that would eventually reshape the history of both worlds. On that morning, as sunlight spread across the sea and the ships anchored near the shore, many sailors may have felt something very simple relief. They had survived the journey. They had found land. Yet the moment when Rodrigo de Triana first saw the island in the darkness did not only mark the end of a voyage, it marked the beginning of a new era in world history. And from that small island with its white sands, the story of the expedition would continue to unfold as the explorers moved through the Caribbean and the Old World and the New World began entering a period of profound transformation. Meeting the Taino. After the ships dropped anchor near the shore and small boats carried the sailors toward the white sands of Guanahani, one of the most remarkable encounters in human history unfolded quietly. There were no clashing weapons, no triumphant cries of victory, only the gentle sound of waves against the shore and curious eyes observing one another. On that shore, the sailors from Europe, led by Columbus, met the indigenous inhabitants of the Caribbean, the Taino people. For the sailors stepping onto land after weeks at sea, the landscape must have felt very different from the world they had left behind. There were no stone fortresses, no crowded European cities. Instead, there were lush forests, wide beaches, and people living in small villages close to nature. The Taino appeared from behind the trees, watching the newcomers with curiosity but not hostility. Historical accounts suggest that the Taino approached the explorers with openness and friendliness. They brought simple gifts, perhaps small ornaments, fruits, or objects made from shells. For them, gift-giving was a natural way to welcome strangers and establish peaceful relations. The European sailors responded with objects they had brought from their ships: glass beads, pieces of colored cloth, and small metal ornaments. To Europeans, these objects were ordinary, but to the Taino, they may have appeared strange and fascinating. And so the first hours of contact may have been peaceful, two groups of people standing on the sand, exchanging small objects and observing one another with curiosity. Yet beneath this calm interaction lay a deeper difference in how each culture understood the world. The Taino lived within a society where community and nature were closely connected. The Europeans, meanwhile, came from societies shaped by kingdoms, organized religion, and competition among empires. For Columbus, this encounter was not only the discovery of new land. In his mind, the Taino might become converts to Christianity and eventually part of the expanding European world. From Jung's perspective, encounters between very different cultures carry symbolic meaning. Each side sees not only the other, but also the unfamiliar, what Jung sometimes described as the other. Humans often respond to the unfamiliar in two ways: with curiosity and learning, or with attempts to reshape it into something familiar. At that moment on the beach of Guanahani, however, none of these long-term consequences were yet visible. What existed there was simply the natural curiosity of human beings meeting for the first time. No one standing on that beach could have imagined that this quiet encounter would eventually lead to centuries of exploration, exchange, conflict, and transformation. Exploring the Caribbean. After leaving the island of Guanahani, which Columbus named San Salvador, the expedition's journey continued. Before them stretched the turquoise waters of the Caribbean Sea, scattered with countless islands. The white sails filled with wind once again as the ships moved through a world that was almost entirely unknown to Europeans. If the Atlantic crossing had been a journey of waiting and uncertainty, the Caribbean now became a space of discovery. In the following days, the expedition encountered larger islands, including Cuba and Hispaniola. As the ships approached the coasts, the scenery astonished many sailors. Tropical forests stretched to the horizon. Rivers flowed gently into the sea. White beaches reflected sunlight beneath the warm sky. For sailors from European ports where land had long been cultivated and cities built, these landscapes seemed almost untouched. The expedition continued meeting different indigenous communities on the islands. Many encounters resembled the first meeting with the Taino: curiosity, gift exchanges, and cautious friendliness. Fruits, food, feathers, and shell ornaments were traded for beads, bells, and small European objects. These exchanges served as a first form of communication between cultures that shared no common language. Yet alongside curiosity, Columbus and his sponsors carried a clear objective: the search for gold. Whenever the explorers noticed small pieces of gold jewelry worn by local people, their interest intensified. They asked where the gold came from. They studied the islands. They recorded coastlines, harbors, and geographical features. These observations would later contribute to the earliest European maps of the Caribbean. For many sailors, the journey began to feel larger than a simple voyage. Each island appearing on the horizon seemed like another chapter of a growing story. Jung might suggest that such voyages reflect a deeper human impulse, the desire to explore the unknown. When humans travel beyond the boundaries of the familiar world, they also expand the boundaries of their own minds. Each new culture and landscape can reshape how people understand the world and themselves. The wreck of the Santa Maria, late in December 1492, another unexpected event changed the course of the expedition. On a calm Christmas night in the Caribbean, beneath a sky filled with stars, the largest ship of the fleet, the Santa Maria, ran aground on a coral reef near the island of Hispaniola. At first, it may have seemed like a small impact, but soon the sailors realized the ship could not move. Waves continued pushing the hull against the reef. Despite desperate efforts, the crew understood that the ship would never sail again. For sailors of the 15th century, losing a ship meant more than losing transportation. The ship was their home, their protection, their world. Yet Columbus responded with determination rather than despair. Instead of abandoning the wreck, the crew began dismantling the ship. Wooden planks, masts, ropes, and materials were carefully removed and carried to shore. From the remains of the Santa Maria, a small settlement was built. It was named La Navidad, Christmas. The name reflected both the time of the shipwreck and its symbolic meaning. From loss came something new. From the remains of the ship, a small fortress rose on the shore. From Jung's perspective, moments like this often represent a familiar psychological pattern transformation through loss. When an old structure collapses, humans reorganize their world and create something new. La Navidad became more than a building. It was a symbol of the attempt to create order and safety in an unfamiliar world. 39 sailors remained there, while Columbus prepared to return to Europe aboard the remaining ships Nina and Pinta. For those staying behind, the decision was not simple. Some may have felt excitement about living in a new land. Others may have felt anxiety at remaining thousands of kilometers from home. When the ships finally prepared to depart, the moment carried deep emotion. Those leaving looked back toward the shore, where their companions stood beside the small wooden fortress. Those remaining watched the sails disappear slowly across the horizon. Jung might see such moments of separation as symbolic turning points. One group returned to the familiar world carrying news of discovery. The other stepped into an uncertain future in a land still unknown to them. And so La Navidad stood quietly on the Caribbean shore, built from the wood of a ship that had completed its journey, a silent symbol of how humans transform loss into the beginning of a new story, the journey home and the storms. After many months, sailing across seas that had never before been known to Europeans, the moment to return home finally arrived. After the small fortress of La Navidad had been built from the wooden remains of the ship Santa Maria, the expedition now had only 2 vessels left, the Nina and the Pinta. Once again, the sails were raised, but this time the direction was different. The ships were no longer heading toward a mysterious horizon. They were sailing toward home, toward Europe, where stories about these newly discovered lands were waiting to be told. Yet if the outward voyage had been a step into the unknown, the journey back was not easy either. The Atlantic Ocean remained as vast as ever, and during winter, those waters could become more dangerous than before. In the first days of the return journey, the sailors likely felt a quiet sense of relief. They had seen land. They had stepped onto distant islands. They had survived a voyage that many people once believed impossible. Standing on the deck, they could watch the Caribbean islands slowly fading behind them, the green forests growing smaller along the horizon. But the ocean is not always gentle. As the two ships moved farther into the Atlantic, the sky began to change. Dark clouds appeared in the distance. The wind grew stronger, and the sea began to rise. Experienced sailors recognized the signs immediately. A storm was approaching. Before long, the ocean became violent. Huge waves struck the wooden hulls. The wind filled the sails with fierce force. Ropes tightened and shrieked through the air. The small ships rose and fell between walls of water. Each time the hull crashed down from the crest of a wave, the entire vessel trembled as if it might break apart. During the storm, the Niña and the Pinta were separated. In the darkness and heavy rain, communication between the ships became impossible. Each vessel now had to face the ocean alone. For sailors of the 15th century, storms at sea were not only physical challenges, they were deeply spiritual trials as well. There were no weather forecasts, no modern instruments, nothing but wind, waves, and human experience. In those moments, many sailors turned toward the one thing that could give them hope: faith. On the deck, amid the roar of wind and crashing waves, sailors began to pray. They asked for protection from God, from the saints, and from whatever forces they believed might hear human voices across the vast ocean. Some even made promises. If they survived the storm, they vowed to make pilgrimages to sacred churches once they returned to Europe. These vows reflected something very human. When facing the fragility of life, people often search for meaning and protection in something greater than themselves. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, moments like these bring humans face to face with deeper layers of the mind. Across many cultures, the sea symbolizes the unconscious, vast, mysterious, and unpredictable. When a person sails through a storm at sea, they are not only confronting the forces of nature, they are also confronting their own fears and hopes. In the darkness of the storm, every sailor may have felt smaller than ever before. A wooden ship in the middle of the ocean can seem as fragile as a human life in the vast universe. And yet in those same moments, something else appears: human resilience. The sailors pulled ropes, pumped water from the hold, and adjusted the sails to keep the ships facing the wind. Hour after hour they worked together, fighting the storm. And slowly, after what must have felt like endless hours, the storm began to weaken. The wind softened. The waves became smaller. The skies slowly brightened as the clouds began to break apart. When the sun finally appeared again above the horizon, its light spread across the ocean like a quiet sign that the trial had passed. The ship was still afloat. The sailors were still alive. And in that moment, many of them likely felt a deep sense of gratitude. They had crossed the ocean twice, once to explore and once to return. Somewhere out on that vast sea, the Pinta was also continuing its own journey toward the distant shores of Europe. The voyage was not over yet, but now the ocean ahead no longer felt like an unknown mystery. It had become a road leading home, returning to Europe 1493 after many months upon the vast ocean. The familiar horizon of Europe finally began to appear once more. The small ships had crossed the ocean twice, once to explore and once to return. When the sails of the Niña and Pinta approached the coast of Spain in 1493, many sailors must have felt emotions, difficult to describe: relief, joy, and perhaps even amazement that they had survived a journey once believed impossible. When the Niña finally reached port, news of the voyage spread quickly. People in coastal towns began hearing stories about distant islands, about white beaches and tropical forests, about unfamiliar people living in lands unknown to Europe. These stories were shared in taverns, in churches, and in royal courts. Soon the name Christopher Columbus became one of the most talked about names in Europe. For many people at that time, the voyage felt like a door opening. For centuries, European maps of the world had contained vast blank spaces. The waters west of the Atlantic had been places of imagination filled with legends of sea monsters and mysterious lands. But after the voyage of 1492, those empty spaces began to be replaced by real islands, real lands, and real people. Because of this, many historians later described the voyage as the beginning of the Age of Discovery. During this period, European nations sent ships across the oceans, searching for new lands, new trade routes, and new opportunities. Ships would soon sail around Africa, reach Asia, and explore the vast continents of the Americas. Yet Columbus's voyage did more than open new routes on the map. It also began a global process of biological and cultural exchange. Historians now call this process the Columbian Exchange. From the Americas came crops such as corn, potatoes, tomatoes, and cacao. These foods eventually spread throughout Europe and later across the world. From Europe and Africa came animals like horses and cattle, as well as crops like wheat. Over time, these exchanges transformed how people around the world farmed, ate, and lived. But history also reminds us that this exchange did not bring only positive changes. Contact between previously separate worlds also brought disease, conflict, and dramatic changes for many indigenous societies in the Americas. Because of this, the voyage of 1492 carries a complex meaning. It represents both the courage and curiosity of human exploration and the beginning of profound historical transformations. From the perspective of Jung, events like this reflect something deeper within the human psyche. Human beings are naturally drawn toward distant horizons and unknown lands. Crossing the ocean becomes a symbol of stepping into the unknown, not only geographically but psychologically as well. When Columbus and his sailors left the port of Palos in 1492, they sailed into what felt like an endless void. But when they returned in 1493, that void had been filled with new maps, new stories, and new possibilities for the future. And so when those small ships finally reached the shores of Europe, it was not only the end of a voyage, it was the beginning of an entirely new chapter in world history. Historical consequences. Looking back across more than 5 centuries, we can see that the voyage of 1492 was not simply a journey across the sea. It was a turning point in human history. When the ships left the port of Palos and crossed the Atlantic, the sailors may have believed they were searching for a route to Asia. But what followed opened a chain of events that reshaped the world. In one sense, the voyage symbolizes courage and exploration. The sailors who boarded those ships in the summer of 1492 accepted the risk of entering an ocean they barely understood. They had no accurate maps, no modern technology, no guarantee of survival. Only small wooden ships sailing knowledge and belief in the possibility of new lands beyond the horizon. For this reason, Columbus's voyage has often been remembered as a symbol of humanity's desire to explore. It reminds us that humans are naturally drawn toward the unknown. Yet history rarely has only one side. When European ships began arriving in the Americas, contact between previously separate worlds created enormous transformations. European nations soon established colonies across the Americas. New political and economic systems emerged. Resources from the new lands began flowing across the ocean. Indigenous societies faced profound changes. New diseases spread. Populations declined in many regions. Entire cultures were transformed. Because of this, the voyage of 1492 holds complex meaning. It opened paths for science, trade, and cultural exchange, but it also initiated processes that deeply affected many societies. From Jung's perspective, events like this mirror deeper patterns in human psychology. Across ancient myths, the hero often leaves the familiar world and journeys into unknown lands. After facing trials and discoveries, the hero returns with new knowledge. In some ways, the voyage of 1492 reflects this ancient story. Humanity stepped across the ocean and entered a larger world. From that moment forward, the map of the world, both external and internal, began to change. Closing reflection. When we quietly reflect on the story of the voyage of 1492, what remains is not simply a list of historical events. It is a deeply human journey, a story about small wooden ships drifting across an immense ocean, about sailors carrying hope and fear, and about the moment when humanity stepped beyond a horizon that had once existed only in imagination. Those sailors likely never realized they were becoming part of a turning point in world history. For them, the voyage was simply an opportunity, a chance for trade, survival, or escape from difficult lives. Yet from the perspective of centuries, their journey opened a new era. The ships carried more than people. They carried ideas, plants, animals, languages, and cultures. From that moment forward, the histories of continents began intertwining in ways never seen before. And perhaps the most fascinating part of this story lies not in the ships or the maps, but in human curiosity itself. Throughout history, people have always looked toward distant horizons and wondered what lies beyond. That curiosity led humans out of caves, across deserts, over oceans, and eventually into space. And when we listen to stories like the voyage of 1492 inches, the quiet of the evening, we realize something important. History is not only about dates and events. It is the long story of human courage, curiosity, and the desire to explore the unknown. Now, as this story gently comes to an end, imagine standing on the deck of a small wooden ship in the middle of the ocean. The night wind moves softly through the sails. The sea reflects the moonlight, and far ahead stretches an endless horizon. The ship glides quietly through the dark water, carrying dreams, stories, and people searching for something beyond the familiar world. And perhaps in some way each of us is also on our own journey, exploring the world and discovering ourselves along the way. If gentle historical stories like this help your mind relax and drift towards sleep, remember to subscribe to Stories for Sleep so you don't miss the next journey. And now, let your mind slowly relax. Let the waves of the story settle like the calm sea at night and allow sleep to come softly. Good night.